Hello, this is Bruce Reviews Music, and this is a very special moment because these are my top 50 albums of 2018. I know it's a very long list, so let's start right away. I will go easily through the first albums on the list. We'll talk a bit about them and we'll go more into details with the top 10. So let's start with the places 50 through 41. My number 50 is an album that I reviewed on this channel. It's Black Space Riders from Münster with Arboretum Part 1, a great space and stoner rock album. My number 49 is Die Freiheit by Dota, a German singer from Berlin. This is my favorite German language album from this year. Check this out, it's a great, nice little songwriter album. My number 48 is by Sam Vanslaw, the album Homotopia. I saw him live a few days ago, was really great, but I had this album on the list before that, so I really like this chamber pop album Homotopia. Check it out as well. My number 47 is Muse with Simulation Theory. In my opinion, their best album since Black Holes and Revelations. They are still a great pop rock band, I love them. My number 46 is Haken with Vector, a very pleasant progressive metal record with some influences from Porcupine Tree and all these bands. Really like them. My number 45 is Book of Travelers by Gabriel Kahane. Great cycle of piano songs inspired by a train tour through the United States, and this is a great concept record. My number 44 is the soundtrack for the movie Annihilation, which was also my favorite movie of the year. The soundtrack was done by Ben Salisbury and Geoff Barrow from Portishead. Very strong soundtrack in a classical dehumanization sci-fi thriller. My number 43 is also a soundtrack. It's the soundtrack for Black Panther. And it's done by Kendrick Lamar and also a lot of other various artists. It's a varied and beautifully produced soundtrack that is more inspired by the film than it's an actual film score. My number 42 is Greta Van Vliet with Anthem of the Peaceful Army. I know it's a very divisive album, but I had a lot of fun with it. Strong songwriting and a classic sound. Love this album. My number 41 is Amorphis with Queen of Time. The Finnish melodic death metal, progressive death metal masters have crafted one of the best albums of their career here, and although it's sometimes a bit guilty pleasure, I really like it. My number 41. So let's go to the next 10 albums, places 40 to 31. My number 40 is Vince Staples with FM, a pretty entertaining and short rap album and a nice follow-up to Summertime '06 rather than a continuation of the styles on Big Fish Theory, an album I didn't like that much. My number 39 is Powerwolf, German power metal band with The Sacrament of Sin, another kind of guilty pleasure. They are a typical German power metal band and this album has a lot of great songwriting on it. My number 38 is Idols with Joy as an Act of Resistance. It was very high up in a lot of the critics' lists, and I'm not sure why this is hyped even more than the debut. Not that much has changed, honestly, but it's still a great band. It's still a good post-punk album. My number 37 is the Norwegian band Aurabrot with Who Do You Love? It's a gothic kind of weird rock album with a lot borrowed by Swans and Nick Cave. Eerie atmosphere, very interesting songwriting. My number 36 is Pagan with Black Wash, a promising debut, mixing black metal and a bit of heavy rock. Reminds me a bit of the first time I heard Quelatak. Pagan are a band from Australia with a female front singer, very interesting sound. My number 35 is Kamasi Washington, Heaven and Earth. It's by far not as good as the Epic, but Kamasi continues to be one of the most interesting figures in modern jazz. And this album is sprawling, it's big, it's also epic. I like it, really. And my number 34 is a German band. It's Chapel of Disease from Cologne with the album And As We Have Seen the Storm, We Have Embraced the Eye. It's a powerful combination of death metal and kind of 70s heavy metal psych rock. Interesting songwriting, also clean singing on this. One of the best death metal records of the year in my opinion. My number 33 is Skeleton Witch with Devouring Radiant Light, a great addition to the black and thrash metal's band's discography, and they have a new singer here and they go far more into epic and long-winded black metal territory than they ever did before. My number 32 is This Wild Life with Petaluma. This is a sweet emo indie album with some really great songwriting on it and an emotional, kind of punky attitude. And finally, my number 31 is Against All Logic with 2012 to 2017 by Chilean music producer Nicolas Jar. It's a great collection of funky house tracks with a broad and dense sound, very enjoyable house music here. So we come to my places 30 to 21, and my number 30 is Yop with Our Raw Heart, a beautiful, challenging and extremely heavy doom metal record with a lot of emotional weight as well and enough melody to be remembered. My number 29 is a debut album by the New Zealand thrash metal band Alien Weaponry 2 that plays a lot with the Maori language, plays a lot with the traditional music from New Zealand, very interesting thrash metal and new metal album. My number 28 is the American rock artist Andrew WK with You're Not Alone. With a more elaborate, well-composed, well-flowing album, he's returning to his usual arena rock style, and this is a lot of fun. One of the most fun records of the year. My number 27 is the Swiss project Zealand Ardor with their second album Stranger Fruit. The mixture of black metal, gospel, electronics and soul works absurdly well on this full-length. And there is still some room for improvement, but they are one of the most interesting sounding bands in the world today. My number 26 is A Perfect Circle with Eat the Elephant. This is a surprisingly poppy and even more surprisingly well done alternative rock record with a bit of prog left, still a great band. My number 25 is Sludge with Esoteric Melancholy. This is oftentimes brutal and very complex death metal, but it's very listenable in the end because of the varied vocals, the varied and very progressive songwriting. Cool death metal album. My number 24 is the Israeli band Orphaned Land, also an album I reviewed on this channel, Unsung Prophets and Dead Messiahs. Mixing symphonic metal and Middle Eastern folk music works very well on this album. My number 23 is One O Tricks Point Never with Age Of. This is a great leap into accessibility for this extraordinary electronic producer, sprawling and lushly produced electronic album. My number 22 is Florence and the Machine from Great Britain with High Has Hope. A beautiful reminiscence to late 80s, early 90s alternative pop music. Very great indie pop record. My number 21 is the British band Anal Nathrak with A New Kind of Horror. A fascinating step forward for this extreme metal band. It's far over the top. The production is very big for a record of this kind of grind death metal genre, and this is a good thing because it's far more listenable and catchy than their older albums. So let's get into the top 20, starting with Daughters, You Won't Get What You Want. The American noise rock band is combining elements of post-punk, mathcore, industrial, improvised rock music here with these repetitive no-wave influences as well. Very interesting and very disturbing record in my opinion. My number 19 is Natalia Lafourcade with Musas Volumen 2, a strong album containing Mexican folk music classics and some beautiful original work by Natalia Lafourcade. I really like this beautiful folk album. My number 18 is Pusha T with Daytona. I'm a bit sad that this isn't a fully fledged album because the production and the song ideas on this absolutely fantastic, produced by Kanye West, one of the best hip-hop records of the year. My number 17 is the British metal veterans Judas Priest with Firepower. Didn't expect this. It's a very classy heavy metal album with melodic, catchy leads, legendary frontman Rob Halford. Nothing bad about this, except maybe that it doesn't explore any new ground. My number 16 is Jack White with his most experimental album Boarding House Reach, a crazy adventurous alternative rock album, a lot of blues influences here, filled with cool little songs and abrasive big sprawling numbers. My number 15 is the Ocean Collective from Germany and Switzerland with Phanerozoic 1 Paleozoic. One of my favorite metal bands, one of my favorite bands in general, and they are still one of the most creative progressive metal bands in the world. My number 14 is the Swedish rock band The Night Flight Orchestra. Sometimes the World Ain't Enough is their new album, and this homage to 80s rock music, maybe not that original, but it's aesthetically so well produced. It blows most of its competitors right out of the water. They are a great live band as well, saw them a few weeks ago, love them. My number 13 is Behemoth, Polish death metal band with I Loved You at Your Darkest. This is even catchier than The Satanist, and Behemoth continue to be one of the best death metal, blackened death metal bands of the world, including a lot of progressive elements. My number 12 is Kids See Ghosts with their self-titled debut, with Kid Cudi and Kanye West collaborating on this. This is a great addition to Kanye's 5x7 songs album series. Because of its variety, it has even more appeal than the other albums in this series for me. My number 11 is Janelle Monáe with Dirty Computer. It's her poppiest and easiest to get into album to date, but nevertheless there's a great backstory to it. It's aesthetically pleasing and well thought. So we are starting with my top 10 now, and in the 10th position it's Vane with Aerozone. They deliver a brutal mix of metalcore, new metal and some small parts of glitchy electronic sounds here. This is a very experimental metal record. It's very heavy, it's very kind of unusual for this style to experiment with these elements, but it works very well. This album is their debut album. They had a few EPs before that, but this shows a very interesting, new and fresh approach to this style, and so this is one of my favorite records of the year. My number 9 is Tribulation with Down Below. They are a Swedish death metal band, and the atmosphere is really like creepy castle, and the hooks are great. This is an album that delivers a lot of interesting intros and outros with extra instrumentation. This is absolutely breathtaking, and for me it's one of the most catchy albums of the year. I kept coming back to it, so this is a deserved place, number 9. My number 8 is Wolastokie Klintu Wakunawa by Jeremy Dutcher. Yeah, I practiced a bit for pronouncing this right. I hope I'm right with it. And this is quite an unusual album because Jeremy Dutcher is a classically trained Canadian singer and pianist, and the interesting thing about it is that it incorporates a lot of Native American influences, and it has got a very sprawling, big sound. It's really a Canadian record, and just the overall epicness of it is very cool, and I think that the production is just go away. Just because you're Canadian and you're epic and you're sounding big and you're influenced by classical music doesn't mean that everything sounds like Godspeed You Black Emperor. Go away! Yeah, I really like this album, and the comparison is maybe a bit far. My number 7 is Casey Musgraves with Golden Hour. This is a strong country album that might seem shallow at first or second listen, but the music is just as melancholic as it's rewarding a second ear, and the melodies are so great. The songwriting is almost perfect in this, and I kept checking out Casey Musgraves' discography after hearing this album. Really fell in love with this sound. My number 6 is Coheed and Cambria, one of my favorite bands in the world, with Vex's Act 1, The Unheavenly Creatures. And it's remarkable that this hybrid of alternative rock and progressive rock still works so well these days. This space odyssey continues, and this is one of their best works with a catchy, atmospheric approach, and I still really love this band. I'm about to see them live in a few months. Coheed and Cambria. Going into my top 5 with Niño de Elche and Antología del Cante Flamenco Heterodoxo, one of the albums I reviewed on this channel, and this album is just part of a great wave of Flamenco Nuevo, but no one has ever put this genre as far as this great anthology, big album, phenomenal work in my opinion. And my number 4 is British producer Sophie with Oil of Every Pearls on the Insides. A fascinating blend of experimental electronics and art pop. There are hints of icy ambient music spicing this up, as well as some bubblegum pop sprinkles. Really, wow, this album is just so crazy. Maybe one of the most original albums on the whole list, and the catchiness is sometimes really through the roof. With the Bronx Metal, we have Death Heaven and Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. The American post-black metal band have, in my opinion, made their best album of their career, and they really are cementing their status as one of the greatest metal bands of our time. If you want to get somebody who isn't into metal, this is the album. Because there are a lot of alternative rock influences here, the melodies are really great and the singing is better than on their previous albums. There are even some very mellow dream pop songs on this. Love this. My number 3, Death Heaven. And the fight for the first position in this year was really hard. There are 2 albums that I think maybe are future classics for me. And the second place goes to Swedish hard rock and heavy metal band Ghost with their album Prequel. They are going far into progressive rock territory here with hints of so many cool genres like synthwave, stoner rock, glam metal, AOR, pop and whatnot. And it's all about the plague, and it's all with these medieval influences. Yeah, it's just because the songwriting is so good, this album is a real contender, but overall the atmosphere holds it together, makes it a really continuous experience and one of the best rock records of the decade, in my opinion. Ghost continued to be the best rock band in the world, and this is my number 2. And my favorite album of the year, as some of you might have predicted from the review on my channel a few weeks ago, it's El Mal Querer by Rosalía from Spain. This is a beautiful continuation of the Flamenco Nuevo milestone that was her last album, Los Angeles. And this album just breaks through the roof and puts her into the position of an upcoming Latin pop superstar, one of the most interesting rising young artists of the decade, in my opinion, because it's broadening her sound, widening it up with R&B, electronic and experimental pop influences. And this record is just so captivating. The atmosphere is so dense, her voice is amazingly beautiful, and it's just getting me every time. And I think this might be one of my favorite albums of the decade because it's so fresh, it's so interesting, yet I think that a lot of people will get into Rosalía when the time comes by, and I love this album so much that this deserves my number 1 spot of the year. Thank you very much for listening, thank you very much for viewing my video, and I hope you will check out some of these really great albums. It was really one of the best years of the decade for music, in my opinion, and we will see you soon with some reviews of new 2019 albums. I'm Bruce Reviews Music, thank you.